Hello, very nice to see everybody. I'm not a scholar. Is it all right if I walk around? Yeah?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want the camera to miss any of this because it's, pure brilliance. I'm not a scholar and I'm not an academic. As I like to tell my students, I'm a reader. I'm a reader and an occasional teacher of students in Irish universities and American universities. Hello, come in. And prisoners in Northern Ireland prisons. I find the prisoners pay far more attention than the students. I'm also, depending on how you look at it, either a small little thread feeding into a greater system, a little stream flowing into the great sea of literature, or I'm a thief, an appropriator, and a reconfigurer of the work of others, a sort of literary pirate. I'm here tonight to talk about a novel, one of mine, one of many. This is it, I, Antigone, which purports to be Antigone's biography of her father, Oedipus. The source, the sole source, is Sophocles' Theban trilogy, particularly Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King, but also Oedipus at Colonus and Antigone. Cormac McCarthy, you do know who Cormac McCarthy is. Anybody not know? Come in. Do you know who Cormac McCarthy is? He's not a very garrulous author. He wrote The Road. And he gave a very rare and famous interview to the New York Times about 40 years ago, in which he said, I quote, "Books are made out of books." And I read this interview a long time ago, tried to find it when preparing for tonight's ordeal, couldn't bloody find it. Perhaps it's been suppressed. Because my memory is that McCarthy goes on to describe the generation of text by text, books coming out of books as, direct quote from memory, literature's dirty secret. Because we're obsessed with originality, you see. The idea that we steal and remake is something we prefer not to talk about. Painters don't have this problem. I'm particularly attracted to texts that nest inside existing texts. Peter Carey's Jack Maggs is the story of Magwitch, the felon in Great Expectations, convict, transportee, Australian peon or slave, and Pip's benefactor. My favourite example of the kind of what I would call the cuckoo book is Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, which purports to be the story of Antoinette Rochester, née Mason, known as Bertha in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, the first Mrs. Rochester, the loony, the mad one in the attic, who thwarts Jane Eyre's marital hopes and dies following a precipitous fall, having set Thornfield Hall on fire. She falls from the roof. Rhys's book, fabulously written, is a slippery article. This is the controversial bit coming up. In my opinion, Rhys never naming Rochester throughout the Wide Sargasso Sea is the wrong move. I know people say, leave it open, leave it ambiguous. I know critics like this. It leaves critics lots of space into which to insert themselves, like corks into bottles. But speaking to you as a writer, as a fabricator, not naming Rochester, dereliction. Name him, nail it, own it. That's what I say. And I'm of course talking about personal preference. I'm a writer who doesn't like that kind of ambiguity. I like things precise and straight. That doesn't mean I don't love Rhys's book. I do. I teach it. And I found it instructive, I hope for my students, and for me, when I write, I found it instructive in relation to Antigone. Rhys's book offers an alternative biography comprised of shards and slant-wise perspectives of Antoinette, the first Mrs. Rochester, which attempts to correct the picture of Bertha that the second Mrs. Rochester offers. Because I know that you're all incredibly familiar with Jane Eyre, which, as I know you all know, is a first-person text. And Jane Eyre, the writer, I mean, obviously Charlotte is the writer, but Jane Eyre purports to be the generator of the text and the language that comprises the text. Well, I mean, here's another controversial bit. I mean, she's a racist, she's rotten with English exceptionalism, and many of her political opinions are absolutely disgusting and ghastly, including, and in particular, her opinions about black people, or people who are a mix of black and white. So Rhys, when she comes in and writes the Wide Sargasso Sea, Rhys, as you know, came from the Caribbean, possibly Creole, possibly white. There's an argument about this. What she's doing is she's coming in and she's going, do you know what? I don't like this biography that has been given about this first Mrs. Rochester, the loony in the attic, and I'm going to recalibrate that biography. I'm going to redo it, and I'm going to trounce all those horrible opinions that Jane Eyre and her supporters have fed into the body politic. So it's when Rhys wrote Wide Sargasso Sea, and this is relevant to me doing this. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about Jean Rhys or anything. What Rhys is doing is she's taking A, Charlotte, and B, a whole body of English or British establishment opinion to task for their prejudice. That's what I think she's doing in Wide Sargasso Sea. She's attacking them. And I really like the idea of somebody going, do you know what? I'm going to take I'm going to take a person and I'm going to rewrite their story, and I'm going to demonstrate in my rewriting of their biography that everything they thought and said is wrong. I'm going to give them a new version of this person. Jean Rhys gives a new version of the first Mrs. Rochester as a traduced, trafficked, browbeaten victim, as opposed to a lunatic who goes mad and burns a house down. Antigone is my narrator. It is called I, Antigone, daughter of a much maligned figure who offers a biography of someone she knows, her father. She knows him well, in order to refute received, convenient, popular opinion. And the prompt for me in the text, the eureka moment, this is how it happened, was when, and I teach Oedipus Rex, I've taught it for a number of years, I read, not in Oedipus Rex, but in Oedipus at Colonus, which is not a text I teach. I read the following, which I quote at the front of my book. Antigone says, "Sirs, sirs," to the visitors who come from Thebes, "you are just and reverent men, though you refuse to hear my poor blind father, because of the things he is known to have done, dash, though they were none of his own devising. Yet have some pity for me, I beseech you, only for my father's sake am I pleading." So that's from the translation of Oedipus at Colonus, E.V. Ria. The word that caught me particularly when I read that speech was the word devising. What a great word. Forces outside Oedipus's purview, as Antigone sees it, create the circumstances of Oedipus's life. It is also the case, which I shall come on to, that he also does do all the things that it is alleged that he did. He did do it. She doesn't deny that he did do what he did. Father murdering, the mother marrying. But what she is keen to assert in this speech is that it is not of his own devising. He is simultaneously responsible, and yet not. He hadn't agency, although he did it. And, I mean, that's what I got out of that speech, and that's what I got out of the play. And thinking about them, the idea that came to me was that it would be a brilliant idea, a la Rees, a la Peter Carey, a la Robert Graves, like Claudius. I stole the idea of the I, comma, and the name from him. Very, very good thief. What a brilliant idea. I'm going to get Antigone to tell his biography and explain how he came to do what he did, and that it wasn't his doing, and it was about things that were outside his control. Now, having had that light bulb moment, I then have to write the wretched book. And it wasn't easy peasy lemon squeezy. Let's just put it like that. Absolutely not. It took 2 or 3 years to write. But when I had my light bulb moment, I'm going to get Antigone to tell Oedipus's story. I suddenly was liberated because it wasn't me who was carrying the baton. It was Antigone. She had to do it. I had assigned authorial responsibility to this fiction. And when you are a writer, the assignation of responsibility for the narrative is liberating. Pip, in Great Expectations, Pip's the teller of the tale. I mean, it's actually written by Dickens. But Dickens is liberated by letting Pip do the work. It's easier to write when someone else does the heavy lifting. So you pretend to yourself when you're writing. It isn't you that's writing. I pretended to myself when I was writing, even though it was me writing. And this does sound like mumbo jumbo, but trust me, I'm a writer. I'm telling you the absolute truth. You persuade yourself that it isn't you that's doing the work, it's a Theban princess. And you feel marvelously free. And a Theban princess who is the product of an incestuous union between Jocasta and her son, who was also her husband Oedipus. The first draft of the text, was called The Late King of Thieves. And I thought that was a great title. I was very enamoured with it. But the publisher or the editor said one day to me, do you know what? That's a terrible title. And I said, I stole from my Claudius, but it was actually the editor's idea. She encouraged me. She said, Graves did it, why don't you do it? So I agreed happily. And it became I, Antigone. And once we'd made that change, it was still, when it was called The Late King of Thieves, it was still written by Antigone, but once it was called I, Antigone, her autobiographical solidity and certainty became, having been two-dimensional, three-dimensional, she became a completely authoritative narrative voice. And told the story of the dominant figure in her life, who was her father, and at the end of the book, the Eteocles Polynices drama is touched upon, and then at the very, very end of the book, it's absolutely clear that Antigone is going to come to a bad end. So much of what Antigone comes to know about Oedipus comes from the thing. Oedipus doesn't know what has happened to him in the past. And Hermes is the person who comes and tells him. And Hermes, having, in my version, enlightened Oedipus about Chrysippus and the curse, Oedipus tells his daughter. Now, in your life, things happen to you, often a long time before, that set you on the course. In the 1970s, I went to the Royal Court in London to see Jonathan Pryce in Hamlet. And when he came on to do the ghost scene, Pryce went into this kind of fugue state. And out of him came the father's voice. Quite often when you see Hamlet, the father's voice is kind of off stage and Hamlet hears it. But he did Hamlet's voice and the ghost's voice. And I sat there in the theatre and I thought, this is incredible. The ghost, the father is in him. And it was a fantastic moment because I thought to myself, oh, wait a second. Yeah, if you're, realistically, if you're a ghost, how would you speak? You have no material substance. So you have to enter someone else in order to articulate. Alternatively, if you don't believe in ghosts, you would say, of course, Hamlet has indwelling in himself, in his personality, a sense of his father, a fragment of his father, suppressed, but coming back, discovering what he's discovered, that Gertrude is remarried and his stepfather is on the throne and that everything is in turmoil, some little, this thing deep in his subconscious, in his unconscious is released and he's able to speak. And this was, as I say, 40 years ago. And I thought to myself, when I came to do this, do you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to have Hermes go in and reveal. He also goes into Europa as an incredible truth teller. This is different to the Pythia. But great amounts of expositional information are going to be communicated in this way, brought into the world. Because that's another problem that you have when you're dealing with a story like this. How do you bring the stuff that exists outside the pith of the story? I mean, traditionally you do it through dialogue, or you might do it through narrative exposition, but I wanted to find a vivid and living way for all that isn't known to become known. And the route I chose was through a god, if you wish to believe in gods who speaks. Alternatively, if you want a realistic explanation, you can say Oedipus had a sense of Hermes inside him. He had access consciously to all of this information, and as he came to the end of his life, into his mind it came. I'm very, very, very keen, when thinking about these things, on the dual explanation. So that things are psychologically plausible, or you could just say, no, it's uncanny, you know, it happened. You can't explain it. So here I take my lead from Sheridan Lefanu, the great Irish ghost story writer. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the climax of Green Tea, the first story in A Glass Darkly. And at the end of this story, Dr. Hesselus finds the Reverend Mr. Jennings with his throat cut in a locked room. So, is it the imp who Jennings, a priest, believes he is pursued by, who's cut his throat? Or is Jennings so poisoned by the green tea he's been drinking incessantly to support his writing life? He's trying to write a kind of universal history of religion. That he's lost his mind and cut his own throat. Is it murder or is it suicide? And you take your pick. And I find this either or. It's up to you, dear reader, thing. Take the rational view, take the irrational view. There is something called Hermes who exists outside who comes in, or you have something Hermes-esque inside you, which you can see at certain moments, like when you're close to death, and that gives you access to the truth. Take your pick. It's up to you. For a story to succeed, it must be frictionless, and it's got to bypass a reader's resistance. And when it comes to the supernatural and the uncanny, that's where I do accept ambiguity. So I'm a very strange fellow. I will not tolerate Rees not naming Rochester. I think that's real dereliction. But on the, you know, on other things, I'm completely, could be this, could be that. There's no pleasing. There's no way of, you know, we writers, we're very, very strange people. As a point of clarification, I would say it was M.R. James who identified that Lefanu, you've all read your Lefanu, haven't you? Yes, of course you have. Yeah. What? Not read Sheridan Lefanu, the inventor of the uncanny tale. It was M.R. James, the English ghost story writer, Whistle and Archon, etc., who divined in Lefanu this ability to be either to present stories that you could interpret realistically or psychologically. Coleridge had a very, very high opinion, the plotting of Oedipus Rex. I mentioned that I've taught the text. I'm very, very impressed with the plotting of Oedipus Rex. I'm impressed by its speed, its compression, its energy. In 75 minutes, Oedipus falls. A lie, which has been hiding in plain sight, so to speak, for a number of years, is unmasked or lifted into the light. Queen kills herself, and Creon assumes authority. And the way is prepared for what is to come. Oedipus of Colonus, and then beyond that, Antigone. 75 minutes. It is incredible, the speed with which all of this is done. And it's incredibly exciting. And as a reader or a spectator, you're carried along so emphatically that when you get to the end and you return to yourself, you do feel you've had your money's worth, unlike a lot of modern plays. Sophocles has delivered. But he also, which you haven't noticed because he's gone so quickly, deceived you. He's a trickster. Think about this bit of the backstory, the murder bit. The father murdering bit. Laius leaves to visit the oracle. He never returns. Shortly after Laius's going, two things happen in Thebes, though the order in which they happen isn't entirely clear. That is deliberate. But this is how I think they happen. This is the order I think they happen in. A stranger appears. He's come from the oracle, where, he is told, has been told, he will do the worst to his beloved parents, the people he believes are his beloved parents, Oedipus and Merope. And as he flees the oracle, in a state, having been told, knowing he can never go back to Corinth, this stranger, on the road near the oracle, kills some people, including a silver-haired old geezer. But amazingly, in Thebes, 2 is never added to 2. It's never hypothesized even that the silver-haired geezer might be the vanished Laius. Of course, what with the killing of the Sphinx and the marrying of Jocasta, you know, and all the kind of stuff that's going on, there is another reason perhaps why 2 is never added to 2 to make 4. The testimony of the figure, minor in the play, pivotal in the plot, simply known as the shepherd, is absolutely crucial here. The shepherd is on the road. He is, at that point, a personal servant to Laius. They're there with other functionaries when the stranger, Oedipus, is encountered. This shepherd sees the murders, but particularly the murder. Everyone, including Laius, is killed by this berserk stranger. And Oedipus is red hot with rage on account of what he's just learned at the oracle. His murders are not only a means of venting, but of giving himself an offence commensurate with the shame he feels. Sidebar. Many offenders I have known have committed a terrible adult crime in order to give themselves an offence commensurate with the shame they feel, of which the origins are abuse in childhood. So Oedipus's actions are psychologically to be completely plausible. So everyone is killed by this berserk stranger, but not the shepherd. He returns to Thebes alone, and according to the report he gives Jocasta, Laius is murdered by robbers, Claude. Jocasta accepts the story. She has a lot going on. I mean, you know, Sphinx, dead husband, city, you know, problems. And she's grief-stricken. But of course, this man who comes and tells her what he hasn't seen, she and he have history, don't they? Big history. Who is this man, this unnamed shepherd? In my text, he's called Antonides. It's Antonides who tells Jocasta that her master, her husband, is killed by robbers. But who knows this is a lie? And who knows something about Jocasta, and Jocasta knows he knows, and who after the murder of Laius and the others on the road, is allowed to return to the slopes of Cithara by Jocasta. What is the conscious and, more importantly, the unconscious traffic between this man and the queen? The foundations are in the deep past. Well, you all know what has happened. This Antonides fellow, this shepherd, when Jocasta gives birth to Oedipus, is given the baby and told to take it out, dump it, leave it to die. And they've tied the feet together to make certain it can't crawl away or do anything. What does he do? Well, of course he doesn't do what he's been told. Why would he want to do what he's been told to do and bring shame and guilt down upon his head? That would be murder. So he gives it, the baby, to another shepherd, a Corinthian, who takes it to Corinth and gives it to the childless Polybus and Merope to rear, and nobody in Thebes knows that the shepherd has disobeyed. The royal couple believe he's performed his baby-killing service, and that's why he's promoted to become Laius' personal servant, which is why he's on the road, which is why he can see the killing which he misreports. And it's he who is summoned by Jocasta at the end in order to put Oedipus's mind at rest by reasserting the canard that Laius is murdered by robbers, many robbers. But, you know, when he appears towards the end, who does he bump into? Well, of course, the Corinthian shepherd, who has come. He's known as the messenger, who has come. This is the shepherd who took Oedipus to Corinth, and he's come with the news that Polybus is dead. And, well, there's a lot of the truth comes out. And the shepherd is forced to say, yeah, we gave the baby to the Corinthian. What's worse, both of these men know who Oedipus is. Hello. Come in. The messenger is rather proud of what he's turned into. Antonides, the shepherd, is just terrified and anxious. Now, one of the things that is not explored in the play, but which I wanted to explore in the novel, is that the shepherd is the only person within the confines of the play who knows everything. He knows about the curse. He knows the person who's going to kill Laius is his son. So when he's on the road and he sees this very angry person who won't get out of the way, Laius is shouting, get out of the way, and telling the coachman to, go forward and telling him to, buzz off. And then the fight ensues. Who else could it be? But the baby he didn't kill. He must know that. That's absolutely fantastic. Then he goes back. Then he tells his lie And I suspect he and Jocasta unconsciously at least understand each other. And then he goes on to the mountains and lives far from Thebes, noticing that children are being born, noticing what is happening and what happens, but saying nothing. Why would he say something? If he said something, he would be in absolutely terrible, terrible trouble. But for a person like me, a writer, well, here's a man whose life is worth narrating. And so a great deal of the body of the text is concerned with creating a backstory for Antimedes. Well, in order for Antimedes to have a backstory, he has to have a mother. So I have arranged this complicated backstory that brings Antimedes' mother and Jocasta together, and then Antimedes comes into the frame. And I really liked the idea that Antigone, when she's telling her story, would know vaguely, at least by sight, these other important figures in the story. She would know Antimedes' mother, vaguely. She would know Antimedes, vaguely, at least. And I also liked the idea of having a story in which there were really important people who weren't toffs. I mean, I like toffs. I am a toff myself. But, you know, the world is broad. So, now, I've talked a lot about Sophocles' cunning construction, the way he hides things, the way there seems to be great areas of narrative, weight and depth in the past of minor characters, like the messenger from Corinth and the shepherd, which I have taken and expanded and augmented in my capacity as a cuckoo writer, an appropriator of other people's texts, and then the person who fiddles with them and expands them. And there are other things in the story, in the novel. Chrysippus' rape is featured, Europa features, she's also raped. But what am I trying to do in this book? And this book is really about knowledge. It is a book about knowledge. Antimedes and his mother Candide, and above them Antigone, have knowledge. And she, Antigone, is she's a sort of Boswell. And as a sort of Boswell, she's able to give you an account of the different kinds of knowledge that these people had or didn't have, and the consequences. And at the same time, she's organizing the material in such a way as to demonstrate, to prove that everything that Oedipus did, he did in ignorance, even though he did do what he did. But for me, all of this is important because, well, it's important because it is extremely interesting, it's brilliant, it's surprising, but it's also relevant to now, to us in the present moment. It's relevant for two different reasons. One, it's a fantastic story about denial, particularly Antimedes' denial. And denial is the most incredible human mechanism. We see things that are blindingly obvious, or we live with terrible truths, and we just either, in Jocasta's case, deny it. In my opinion, that's what's happening, although she knows it, or we just avert our gaze. Go, well, I'm not going to engage with that, which is what Antimedes' position is. If he were to tell the truth, I mean, well, I'm very, very interested in articulating, in writing stories that talk about that kind of human delinquency. And the other thing that strikes me about this ancient play, post-Brexit and post-Trump and post-Orban and post-Modi, is that it's a story about a hierarchical world with structures and boundaries, which isn't like the world in which I live, but operates very much like the world in which I live. And in particular, the way in which we believe ourselves not to be at fault. None of this is of our own devising, what we do. And at the same time, we live with the fact that it is all of our own devising. We are the causes of climate change. We did it. And we are the causes of all sorts of other things. And we live in this strange no man's world when we both know and deny. It's a human thing. And the whole Oedipus story seems to, in a fabulous way, bring that to life. That I think it's worth thinking about. I'm not saying we're bad. I'm just simply saying, as human beings, we should really think about our duality. We are, if you like, victimizers and victims. The other thing I like about this story is that it contains within it ideas which we would do well to pay attention to about moderation and exercising our intelligence. When Oedipus goes to the arca, he asks the wrong question. We have to say to ourselves, what is the right question? Or think about how we interrogate whatever is going on. And it's a play that is saying, and my novel tries to follow in its footsteps, think about what you're doing. Don't think about right or wrong. Just think about what you're doing. Think about the consequences. Be alert, be awake, be conscious. And that seems to be really, really powerfully encoded in the Sophocles, and it really sort of, well, it's something that I have taken to heart. I started talking about McCarthy and the generation of text by text. And the book wouldn't have happened had it not been for Sophocles and other writers. I mean, obviously, I read Homer, and I, was tremendously admiring, as I've already indicated, of, the Sophoclean ability to construct a plot that's like a Swiss watch mechanism in his head. His ability to deliver pleasure, all of these things. But it's the way in which the text says to us, you need to live better, quieter, calmer lives, folks, than you are currently living. That is the message of this play that is thousands of years old. That's what you have to do. And you have to choose. You have to do the work. It's over to you. That's all I have to say. Ask any questions.
Thank you.